Good morning, dearest friends. Welcome. Thank you so much for hopping on board. Tuesday, March 8th, the 5th of Adar Beis or Adar Sheni. We're studying the entire Talmud, one page, one line, and sometimes even less than that. Studying the whole Gemara presently, Maseches Shabbos, and we are on the tail end of Perek Yud Gimel, Perek Shleisha Asar. Today, tomorrow, we'll make a siyum on the 13th chapter. With Hashem's help, we'll already be in the 14th chapter of Maseches Shabbos. We've been talking about animals, trapping them. You know they say about the person who says he loves fish? So you don't love fish, you love...
You love fish. You want to catch it.
So anyway, so we're talking...
Rabbi
Yeah, so we're talking about trapping animals, which is prohibited on Shabbos. And as we saw yesterday, I know some of you had to leave early. We took a fast peek into the Shulchan Aruch, which codifies some of the discussions about trapping on Shabbos. And there was an interesting comment by the Ramah talking about if you're allowed to hunt with dogs on Shabbos. And so the Shulchan Aruch says that if you hunt with a dog, it's considered hunting. So if you sick a dog to catch an animal, that's hunting. And then we saw how the Ramah, Moshe Iselin of Krakow, who lived in Poland and no doubt was familiar with Polish nobility's hunting rituals, he writes, in truth, you shouldn't be hunting with a dog even in the weekdays. And so it's a cute and interesting, I believe, a criticism of the how do you call it, the aristocracy's hunting styles. In Judaism, I suppose the reason that should be trapping or hunting would be for consumption, and so therefore we're primarily talking about kosher animals, although we did leave off a general assertion that if an animal is commonly hunted, well then it's most certainly a malacha, because the act of hunting is because you desire the animal, either it's for its protein or its hide or the trophy, but whatever it is, it's something that you desire. Whereas there are certain critters that we don't hunt for them. We might hunt them in a extermination kind of way, but that is not going to be constructive in the sense that the Talmud typically is using. And then we moved on, and this is where we're going to pick up to talk about hunting a deer. How do you hunt a deer? Well, or I shouldn't say hunting, trapping a deer. Well, if you can manage to chase the deer into your house, or maybe into another structure that's an enclosure that's meant for trapping deer, well, you're almost there. But closing the door is a necessary component, and that was what we discussed. And then we read a Mishnah that said, what happens if the deer is inside? One person locks the door, he's chayiv. Two people do it together, and they could do it independently. The Mishnah told us this is considered shnayim shasu. This is a two people are involved in a one-person melacha, and they would be exempt unless they both need each other's support. And of course, there was a dissenting opinion that says that you're always chayiv when you do something together, even if you need the other person's support. Then the Gemara said, a lion, you might not believe this, but a lion is not considered contained until it is really well secure in a cage. But just because you're holding onto its tail, I know, what is it, catch a tiger? Oh, by the toe. Okay, anyways, the point is, until it's in a cage, it's not contained, it's not subdued, and it's not in your domain. And now we're going to start a new Mishnah, for which we're going to share the screen and get started. And once again, thank you all for being here. We are dedicating our learning for the well-being of the dear members of our Chabura, their households, those on both sides of the camera, as well as Klal Yisrael, a prayer for our brothers and sisters in Ukraine. And I want to mention once again two names, Leah Basrita and Malka Basrivka, and everyone else that is in need of a refuah shlema. We should have it, and it should be simple, immediate, and complete. And again, for only goodness. While I'm finding the place, I should remind you, we also talked about the condition of an animal. If it's, what does sick mean? Is it what is a blind animal vulnerable to trapping? Is a sleeping animal alert to escape capture? And those were the issues that we discussed. And now we're going to talk about what seems like a side issue, but it's related to the art of and the act of trapping, and that's what we are discussing. We're talking about trapping. So trapping means the animal is stuck and is now forced to be in in the cage, in the structure, whatever the previous mission discussed, right? Different animals have different kind of enclosures. Yashav ha'echad ala Pesach. One person sits down in the doorway. V'loi mil'ahu. Rabbi Errol, if I could say your words were somewhat prophetic, not that I want to rehash them, but we spoke about a person filling up the entire photograph. Well, here we have the discussion about a person who does or does not fill in a doorway. V'loi mil'ahu. Now realize not all doorways are created equal. Not every person has the same dimensions or size. So then Yashav Hasheni umilahu, and then another person sat down next to him in a way that they're blocking the doorway. Now the deer cannot escape. So guess what? Hasheni Chayav, the second person who totally blocked in the doorway to the point where an animal cannot leave, he's Chayav. Why is he Chayav? Because it's as if you turn the lock. He didn't turn the lock. He created the final blockage, the final place where the animal is no longer able to escape. Rashi, Shahud Sado, in this very moment, he is trapping the animal. Had he not gone there, what would happen? The animal would escape. Very interesting.
I understand the concept. However, without the first one, the second one going there wouldn't be able to fill the opening.
Oh, so
you
this
need-
is
you need
the debate or the clair. This is what we need to think about. On one hand, you are correct that every part of the wall is essential for the enclosure, and so the first individual, had he not sat down, the wall would still be open. But his act of sitting was not an act of trapping. The animal was not prevented from escaping. So it was only one single player with his action, with his activity, namely placing himself in the breach, if you will. It was only a single person who actually blocked it. But it's a good question and it's a good thing to ponder. And the Gemara is not, the mission is not done working through different scenarios. And so keep your question because we're going to want to work through this a little more.
Rabbi,
Yes, Rabbi.
it could be the opposite. The guy is sitting and the first guy says, don't leave because I want the animal.
Okay. Explain.
No, so why is this? Why should the second? There could be a scenario where the second person shouldn't be chayav because he would go. His kavana is not to be there.
So although kavana is important, the question is what you. It's important. I think what you on the road here. I don't see that question. The first guy sits another guy or alongside him, and is also blocking the door. Although the first guy gets up, and so now the door is locked. The walkway is blocked only by the second person. Let's read this. Who state of not all of a sudden for traffic. You're just and so. Red methods to keep happening is this what we're saying here. I was already sitting, it's already in custom. And one guy said we contributed the clothes. That's what I believe the mission. Hold on. My headphones are acting on me. Rebel, say something.
I wanted to ask a basic question.
Go ahead.
Maybe it's a silly question. How did we get the trapping from work on the Mishkan?
No. What would you say?
What's the connection?
You're saying why is trapping one of the malachis of the Mishkan?
Yeah.
So what were the materials that the Mishkan was made out of?
You mean because of animal skins, etc. Et
yeah, the Mishkan was made of animal skins and certain pigments were animal byproducts. And so to build a Mishkan, trapping was necessary. Absolutely. Yeah. So that is what we are saying. All right, let's see. Yes.
What happens if the animal came into your reshoot and then he can't get out?
You're saying, what if you didn't trap it? The animal trapped itself?
Correct. He came into your property and he trapped himself. He doesn't know how to get out now.
All right. So you didn't trap it, right?
Him, could you help the animal get out on Shabbos?
Good question, but not the question of the moment. So let's hold up. Hold on to that.
Okay.
Your question is more a question of book. Can you unlock the door? Absolutely. Is there an issue of muksa? Maybe. All right, folks. We've turned the page. 107a. Last page of chapter 13. The last page of the Bar Mitzvah chapter. And soon we're going to enter chapter 14, which is going to be some fun. So let's take a look at the Gemara. Amar Rabbi Abba, Amar Rabbi Chia, Bar Ashi, Amar Rav. A teaching, an associated, related teaching. Nichnesa loy tzipor tachas knafav. And this may be some of our questions. A bird flies into your clothing. He can stay in his original position. How do you get, Dr. Stamler? You're wondering, knafav, how does that sound like clothing? So tachas kanfik susay ve'en yachalotze sheninol b'fanav mi'elav. The animal flew in and now it's trapped in your pockets or your garments. So he's allowed to sit on the shamroi. He could maintain the status quo. Once the animal's trapped, you're not compelled to free it if you didn't actively trap it. Rav Nachman Bar Yitzchak asks a challenge to this. Our Mishnah says, Yashav Harishan ala Pesach omilo. One person fills up the doorway. Uba Asheni, Yashav Betzile. Someone else goes and sits next to him. Afopisha Amad Harishan v'halach loy. Harishan Chayiv Asheni Potter. Even though the first guy got up, the second guy's Potter. My love, what does this not indicate? Usually, who remembers the rule? Usually, when a Mishnah says Potter, it means you are exempt from biblical consequences. But one is yet not meant to act in such a manner. My love, Potter Avalasar, surely it means that he is exempt from biblical consequences, but he is not to do so. Loy, the Gemara says no. Potter umoter. Indeed, our Mishnah here means Potter umoter. If you are sitting innocently in a doorway, your back to your friend, and then your friend gets up, you are not compelled at all, not rabbinically or biblically, to get up. You're fine. Sit tight if you want. Now, again, I'm trying to envision a deer desperate to get out of a enclosure, and you are the thing in its way. I'm not sure how that would feel for the person that's sitting and enduring some kind of nudging or prying or pushing. I've never seen a deer in traps, so I don't know, but I can imagine that wouldn't be the most pleasant few hours of Shabbat. But again, we're not talking about comfort, we're talking about the essential halachic question. And indeed, it is likely this is the likely pshat. This is how it seems. Because we read the next part of the Mishnah. Lama Zadaima, we said, what is it akin to? The person that remains seating. He's the second person, so he didn't trap the animal, but he's now maintaining the enclosure. And the Mishnah says it's like Noyal es Beisai l'Shaimroi. You're locking your door and the animal is already inside. Michlal the Potter Mutter. It would infer that this is Potter. You're off the hook for biblical consequences, and indeed it is Mutter. And the Gemara says, Shma Mina, indeed, this is so.
Rabbi,
Yes, Rabbi.
I think the deer is free and the people are trapped.
Oh, this is I hear you.
They can't move. They can't get out.
I hear your points. The difference is the person is trapped by his own. It sounds like we're heading towards a deep philosophical question of what is the definition of freedom and what is the definition of being trapped. If a person is compelled to sit all Shabbos blocking the doorway, I hear you. You're essentially less mobile than the deer. A good question.
But what a mess the deer would make. Oh, boy.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Ika Damri. This question, this thought process is preserved in an alternate manner. Amar Rav Nachman Bar Yitzchak. Rav Nachman Bar Yitzchak says, "Afana nami tanina." So here's, if I understand correctly, the distinction. Here we had the text that says that if the bird gets trapped, and we thought it was a contradiction, Tar Mishnah, Pater Aval Aser, and then we conclude that no, actually it is Mutar Lechatchil. You may actually do so. Now the Gemara is going to present the same analysis of these two texts, but I believe not in a way that is a stira, a contradiction, but b'nichusa, a supportive text. Afanan amitanina. So Rav Nachman Bar Yitzchak says that just like the Mishnah, the teaching that says about a bird from Rav, and then Rav Nachman says we have a Mishnah that supports your assertion that if the bird gets trapped in your garments, you can stay there. What is that? What is that support? Our Mishnah. Although the first person that was sitting in the doorway gets up, he is yet exempt. My love, Potter and Mutter. Does this mean that it is Potter and Mutter? Like Potter of Aser. We think no, it is Aser. Tani Seifa, based on reading the second half of the Mishnah. Basically, I would think that it means Potter of Aser. You are off the hook biblically, but shouldn't do so. The Gemara says no. Based on the balance of the Mishnah, it is clear that we are describing an action that is entirely permissible, and the Gemara says, Shma Mina, indeed, this is so.
Rabbi?
Yes.
If trapping is melacha, what about freeing the animal? Is the inverse action is somehow considered to be melacha, or is totally irrelevant to the issues of trapping?
Shkaya for the question. I think you have a companion with this question. I don't remember, was it Alan? Someone else, or maybe it was Eli asked a similar question, I think. Just like many other malachas, there's building and demolition and tearing and stitching. So is there freeing? I don't want to give you a final answer, but I believe there's a distinction, which is that there's very little or no constructive purpose to freeing an animal, except you might say, in the state of Florida, there are certain fish or other creatures that if you should capture them, you are compelled to release them at the pain of a fine. And so you might say it is constructive, but I don't believe that meets the definition of constructive that we are working with in Masechet Shabbos.
Actually, you are raising the second question. If the animal is trapped and then subsequently released, does it eliminate the liability, or is there a period of time when the animal is considered trapped? We know that there are conditions for trapping for lion that is not trapped until it is secured. But what about other animals? Should we wait 1 hour to be liable, or 15 seconds is
You're
sufficient?
asking very, very interesting questions. You're asking, is there a minimum shiur? Is there a minimum amount of time that we haven't seen so yet. So far, we've seen more the totality, the total inability of the animal to escape seems to be a greater definition. It doesn't even say the animal realizes that it can't escape. The moment the door is locked, whether the animal knows it or not, it is trapped. So from what we've seen thus far, there is no such indication. And in my perusal of the Code of Jewish Law, I don't recall seeing anything like that as well. But I would like to have an open mind that we may see some additional data or ideas. And of course, just to add that, assuming that there is no prohibition for freeing a trapped animal, if there were malachos involved, that would be a different issue. So let's say you have to cut loose or whatever, then there may be problems. Dr. Hammer?
I'm surprised that the issue of Tsar Balei Chaim hasn't come up, because all of these examples that you're giving are assuming that that's not an issue. But often when an animal is trapped and you allow them to stay trapped, it it could lead to the death of that animal.
So I want to just add without I'm going to frustrate you by not giving the full story. But as you may recall, there are discussions about what activities one may do to care for an animal. And in that discussion, we did weigh to some extent the balance of Tsar Bali Chaim versus Malacha.
Right.
And it's not entirely so that Tsar Bali Chaim will always overwhelm the issues of Shabbos, but there is some consideration. In our discussion, there is no such talk because, and the Gemara isn't talking here about the virtue of trapping or non-trapping. The Gemara here assumes that the trapping that is, I believe, the Gemara here is assuming that the type of trapping that is transpiring is a trapping that is permissible. And I actually alluded to that when saying that the primary examples we said were about, a deer or kosher grasshoppers, because Judaism does allow trapping for the purpose of consumption, notwithstanding discomfort that an animal will experience. Doctor?
Yes, I'm good.
Okay,
Rabbi.
Shkar, bring that up. And it is important because whether it's the issue at hand, there is no question that the Torah has an important, and it wants to instill the value of mitigating Tsar Bali Chaim and not having an animal suffer. So it is an important thing to bring up, although it's not immediately halachically relevant to the very specific conversation we're having now. So shkach for that. Rabbi Allen? And I should say, Rabbi Allen, I think you are our outdoorsman, so I listen extra carefully when you speak up on this subject.
Well, first of all, there's different types of traps. I don't know if they had traps in those days that clamped onto the leg of an animal,
like a snare.
If a snare, if so, releasing the animal would be a mitzvah, I guess, no matter what time.
It doesn't sound,
because
I
it
do
can
want to
kill the
clarify.
animal.
It does not sound like the kind of traps that we're talking about are the kinds that we envision in Canada in the wilderness with a snare, with a snare. It sounds more like the animal is forced into an enclosure of sorts. And so I'm not saying that it is for sure not such a type of trap, but that doesn't seem to be the trap that we are discussing. But I will say that as far as,
do they show any
sorry?
traps on the? Can we see any traps on?
Interesting that you ask. Can you see my shared screen now?
No.
Yeah.
What do you see? The Gemara or you see?
Gemara.
Okay,
Gemara and you.
Okay, I'm gonna stop the share for a moment. Share.
Because that would settle the problem altogether.
Hold on. I'm kidding because these pictures ultimately are not going to really help us out. But I just want to show you what we have over here. So here you have the animals. This is the Mishnah, many Mishnahs ago. So the deer, I have a feeling this fence would need to be a little taller for the deer to be enclosed. But there you get the deer into a closet or into a house, in an enclosure, a cage with a roof. So none of the ways that the illustrator of this work envision a snare. That's a scary lion. As you can see, it needs to be really well caged in. And here is how they conceive blocking a doorway, in case you were wondering. The guy basically fills the whole way. Now, I'm not sure if we had to take bets at the odds of this man versus the deer, I'm not sure who prevails in a matchup. But anyways, we assume that the person is able to block and close the person in. But again, Alan, these are a individual person's perspective on the Talmud, but it is interesting, or I should point out, that these illustrations do not use a snare or anything of that sort.
Aren't these people putting themselves in a dangerous situation?
I believe so.
When a deer charges, he charges with his antlers.
Well, that's what I was thinking.
I would like to be stuck in the wind.
As I said, if I had to conceive a matchup between the person there and the deer, I'm not sure who walks out the victor. And so I would certainly not want to be a person who's using their body to block in a door against the deer. Unless maybe, let me go back to the Mishnah just for a moment. You know what? I have to correct myself a bit. The Mishnah itself has no mention of a deer. The Mishnah does not use the word deer once. It's ongoing. The animal that we keep on mentioning is a deer. So, and even Rabbi Steinsaltz here in his commentary adds deer. But maybe and the illustrator also portrays a deer, but maybe we're talking about a different kinds of animal. Although I guess in the final line it does talk about a deer. So I don't know. Maybe we're talking about a baby deer, a young deer. Today there's other reasons, by the way, that you don't necessarily want to get into physical contact with a deer. I think they carry a number of ticks. And so there are other reasons why a person might want to admire the deer from a slight distance. That's just my understanding. All right, continuing in the Gemara. Interesting Gemara. Amar Shmuel, call Peturei de Shabbos. Every time that in the laws of Shabbos we mention Patur, something is exempt. What do we mean? Patur, Aval Asr. We always say Patur, you're exempt biblically, but don't do it. The Chazal, rabbis, Jewish law prohibits it. Levar mihani tlas, with the three important exceptions in which the Patur umutter. It is not only Patur, but it is actually permitted. The Chazal never restricted these practices, which are namely Chada. Number one is our instance here, that if you're sitting in the door, the Patur mutter. How do I know that you're actually Patur mutter? So we have evidence from the Mishnah that you are entirely allowed to lock in an animal. Or I'm sorry, if you are sitting there and the animal's in there, you're fine if you're not the one that locked it up. V'idach, the second instance, hamapis morsa b'Shabbos, popping a blister to allow pus to escape on Shabbos. Let's see Rabbi Steinsaltz's translation. Drains an infection of pus. If he's doing it to create an opening, he is chayiv. We'll discuss what that might mean, and we'll ask our folks of the medical industry to help us out here. But one second. But if all he is attempting to do is to extract pus, this is maybe not the most appetizing segment of the Talmud. Well, then Patur, he is exempt. By the Patur mutter, how do I know that this is absolutely permitted? Tanan, machat shal yad, little basakoitz. We know this because there's a Mishnah that teaches that a needle, which is for sewing, which you think is muktzah, is not it's not considered a muktzah because you can use it to extract a splinter. And although in order to extract a splinter with a needle, you're making a hole, the whole point is only extraction. You don't have value from the hole that's now in the human body. Here we see that a person is also allowed to cause a hole to extract pus on Shabbos. There's a lot of in-depth discussion that will ensue, but let's first see the three examples. We'll look at Rashi and then we'll take it from there. So example one is if you're sitting and the animal's been trapped and you keep the door locked or you stay sitting, you're patur mutter. Example number two is to the extraction of pus and making a hole to extract the pus, so long as the purpose is only to drain, not to have a whole, which again, we'll see what you might want that whole. The third instance, if you're trapping a snake on Shabbos, if the reason why you are trapping it is to avoid being bitten, patur, one is exempt. This is not a prohibited act of trapping. And the Gemara adds, Im l'rafua, and we saw this in the Shulchan Aruch yesterday, Im l'rafua, if the reason why he's trapping this animal is for healing, for a remedy, and we'll discuss soon what that might be, chayiv. He's not allowed to do that. But otherwise, it is patur. How do I know here that this is an instance where trapping is not only not a biblical problem, but mutar? The Tanan, as we learn in a Mishnah, koifin kara al aner b'shvil shleitechas b'koira. The person is allowed to put a dish on a candle so that it doesn't burn down the house. You're also allowed to put a dish over a child's.
We have background noise, Rabbi.
Hold on, hit mute all again.
Somebody's.
All right. And a person is also allowed to put a keli, a vessel, on top of a scorpion to prevent it from biting, from stinging rather, even though this essentially is the act of trapping. So we infer from here that you're allowed to trap dangerous animals to prevent them from causing hazard. Real fast, Hadran Alacha Oyreg. These are the final closing words of Perek 13, Yud Gimel, Shleisha Asar, the Bar Mitzvah chapter of Masechah Shabbos, and we've concluded it. And in a moment, we'll go on to the 14th chapter. But first, let's take a look through Rashi. Hamapis Mivakeya Morsa. This is the popping of a blister, and the word Morsa in Old French means an infection, a wound, and there we have it. Rashi, he says that you're not allowed to pop a blister or a remove or break the skin if the point is to make an opening. Rashi, apparently, you may desire to extract the pus, but there's also, for healing purposes, there may be a desire to open up the skin and to put in ointment and remedies and whatever. So if the purpose is to have access to the infection, that is prohibited. But if the purpose is just to remove pus, that is permitted. Of course, to remind everyone, if there's actual pikuach nefesh, there's actual jeopardy to human life, of course, all efforts are permitted. And here we're talking about where that is not the case. What's the prohibition? Chayiv. Mishum boina pesach. It's like you're making a doorway, an entrance. Ay mishum misakin kli. It's like you're fixing. Let's hold off on any analysis of this Rashi for now. The purpose is only to remove what's there now, but you're not hoping to keep an open place to drain. That's permitted. Pater umuter, the enkan tikun, just removing pus. That's not fixing. But Rabbanan Nami, you're not making something. But Rabbanan Nami like Gazerma, Mishvos Mishum Tzara. And the Chazal didn't prohibit this because you are just mitigating pain. The removal of a splinter is very much like the removing of pus. The mitzarla is pain. I imagine there's probably, and again, I'm sure we probably want to move past this, but I imagine sometimes if a person has an infection, the pus, sometimes you shouldn't touch it, but sometimes it's perhaps creating pressure and additional pain, and maybe draining it would alleviate some of that pressure. And you tell us, Rashi points out we're talking about a needle that's used for stitching. So we're talking about a kind of needle which usually is its work is prohibited on Shabbos, and so ostensibly should be muksa. And the Mishnah says actually you can handle it because there are also prevalent permissible uses. Then the last point the Mishnah says is you're allowed to trap a snake, and it quotes the teaching that says you're allowed to put a dish on top of a scorpion to trap it. Rashi lechatchila. And now the reason why you put a dish over the candle is not to put it out. It's only there to prevent the spread. You are trying to keep this scorpion from biting. By extension, you've also trapped it. So here we've said that it is permissible. Let us take a fast peek into first the Mishnah Torah and then the Shulchan Aruch. This is the halacha that I didn't read it. If you're speaking, folks, everyone's muted, so please unmute if you're saying something. Was someone saying something? Okay. Doctor? All right, the Rambam quotes our Gemara and says, a deer runs into your house and you lock the door, chayiv. This is prohibited. You've trapped the deer. Nalu shnayim pturim. Two people did it together, as we learned yesterday. Patur. Now, if one person can't get the door shut, two together, they're both chayiv. Rejecting the opinion of Rabbi Shimon in the Mishnah. Now, what happens if a person sits on the doorway and he didn't fill up the whole doorway? And a second person comes and he does fill the doorway and thus traps in the animal. Hasheni chayiv. Only the second person is chayiv. Notwithstanding our dear Dr. Stamler's good question, because ultimately the only person that affected a total capture, a total trapping of the animal is the second person. Yashav Arishim Olo. One person came and he fully trapped it in. And then a second person sits and blocks in the same doorway. Although the first person got up and is gone. Sorry, the guy who initiated, who finalized the trapping, is chayiv. The second person has not done anything. And this is quoting our Gemara that says mutter, sorry, pater umutter. That second person is absolutely allowed to remain in his place and then take his trophy home. Similar to a person who closes his door for security purposes and the deer happens to be inside. Similarly, a person is permitted, as the Gemara taught us, to sit in one place and allow a bird to stay trapped. He's not actively trapping it, it is just remaining trapped. And the Shulchan Aruch asserts the same thing, halacha lemaisa. Any comments or thoughts before we take a peek at our new chapter and our new Mishnah? Actually, we should look at one more thing. Let's take a fast look at the Shulchan Aruch. The Shulchan Aruch says, "Hamapis shchin b'Shabbos." If a person pops a boil on Shabbos, kedei l'harchif pi hamaka, with the intention of expanding pi hamaka, with the intention of having an open access to the wound, kederach sharoifim oisim, in a manner that is common with physicians, shemiskavnim b'rafua, because in part of the healing process was leharchif pi hamaka, to open up the exposed wound. Harei zechayiv, one is liable. Umishum maka b'patish, and this is like the act of maka b'patish, the final step of a process. Shizui meleches haroifa, because this is the expert work of a physician. If it's only about draining, this is mutter. All right, let's take a sneak peek of our new Gemara, our new Mishnah, and then we'll close out just probably a minute or two early. This is a new chapter, chapter 14, which is known as Perek Shmoina Shiratzim. It continues generally along the discussion of trapping different kinds of animals, and there's essentially the issue of trapping, there's an issue of shchita, and there's also a matter that's going to become relevant very soon, which is the matter of tuma and tara, ritual purity. So before we start, let's do this. Actually, no, we'll read the Mishnah fast, and then we'll do some. Then, if we have time, we'll do a little more. Shmoyne Shratzim. The Torah mentions by name 8 different kinds of creeping animals. Hamura b'Torah. So these 8 animals. Sodon, if you trap them, v'hachoyvel bohen, and if a person wounds them, chayiv. One is chayiv. Rashi points out, Hatzidon, you trap them, chayiv, shebeminoi nitzod, because these are critters that are trapped. And why are you not allowed to hurt them? The yesh lahem are, these are animals that have skin, leather of sorts. V'havyolei chabura she'enei chayzeres, and it is a hard wound to heal. V'havyolei tolda deshoichet, and Rashi says this is like slaughtering. Harming a wound could be along the way to shchita. This needs a lot of understanding too. Alternatively, kivan the ishlam or nitzbah or bedam hanitzar boy v'chai mishum tzaveh. Rashi quotes alternatively, when you hurt the animal, even if you don't actually cut it, it gets a black and blue mark, and the skin has now a change in its pigment. We'll understand and analyze a lot more, but let's just get through the mission. So, if you capture or harm, you wound one of these animals, chayiv. Ushar, shkatzim, or ramasim. What about all other non-biblically referenced creeping creatures? Hachoyvel b'hem potter. If a person hurts them, they would be exempt. Hatzodon l'tzoyrech. If you trap them for a need, chayiv, one is chayiv. But if not for a constructive purpose, one is exempt. Now, what about if a person has a pet or an animal that's already in his ownership? By catching it, potter, this is not an act of trapping because the animal already is not free. But if you wound an animal, this is not permitted. Let's read some more Rashis, and then the other critters that are not mentioned explicitly in the Torah, they do not have a skin that is used as leather, and therefore this is not considered shchita. Again, we have a lot of Gemara, a lot of analysis that is necessary. These are essentially animals that are not normally captured because you're not going to eat them, and their skin are not of value. And thus, this is a malacha that is not constructive. You don't actually need the critter. And the Gemara is going to say that this is the opinion of Rabbi Shimon. You have a pet that never runs away, you always have it, well then you haven't trapped it, it's already trapped, it's already domesticated. But of course, you're not allowed to harm an animal that's in your protection. That's considered chayva. So this Mishnah opens a lot of big boxes, but let's first take a look at the pasuk. In the laws of kosher and non-kosher animals, this is Parshas Shmini. So we talk about a lot of different matters of kosher. First, we talk about land animals, right? Chazir famously, the hare, etc., etc. Then we talk about fish, kosher and non-kosher. We talk about birds, kosher and non-kosher. And then we have this. V'zelochem hatame b'sheretz. These are the critters that are impure as a sheretz that crawl on the earth. Hacholed, ha'achbar, hatzab limineu. Mole, mouse, lizards. V'hanaka, we're using his translation, although we probably will find our Gemara having different translations. Hanaka, hakoach, v'alita'ah. Gecko, crocodile, lizard. V'achomet, v'antinshomes, sand lizard, and chameleon. Different kinds of animals of the lizard species. How many have we mentioned? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. 8 different creatures. And so our Mishnah says, Shmoina Shratzim, these 8 critters, the Torah chooses to mention them specifically. They are animals that the Mishnah considers, halacha considers conventionally trapped, and therefore if you trap them, you're chayiv, etc., etc. We're in the Gemara, of course, we're going to expand the analysis to understand the animals, what their value is, what it exactly means that you're chayiv for trapping them. We're also going to understand what the relationship between a wound and shechita is, and so much more. So we're really midway in a process of understanding the laws of trapping, the animals that are being trapped, why it's prohibited and permitted, and that's where we're going to start tomorrow. So Mazel Tov for finishing our Bar Mitzvah chapter. Now we're up to Perek Yudalad. May Hashem give koyach, strength, endurance, and wisdom to continue our journey through the Talmud with health, menuchas hanefesh, and all good blessings. And thank you all for being here, making sure this is the most enlightening and interesting discussion. So thank you all. And just 2-3 minutes early, Rabbi Shalom Ber, you're going to do Chumash in a few minutes, right? All right, so in just a minute or two, Rabbi Shalom Ber will rejoin this link, and you're invited to do the same to study today's Chumash. Mazel Tov, Mazel Tov. We'll do an empty coffee cup l'chaim, and we should continue to celebrate again. And thank you all for being along for the ride. L'chaim.